The Illinois primary is finally upon us, but there's still no state budget. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenberg from the State Journal-Register. Boy, have we got a lot to talk about now. Was there an election going on? I think there is. Matt Porter is here. He is State House Bureau Chief, WCIA, Channel 3 from Champaign, and always working at the State House. Charlie Wheeler, Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield, longtime State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you, Bernie.
Well, we usually start out with state issues, but you know, we've got these presidential candidates and their surrogates visiting Illinois over the final weekend before Tuesday's primary. Illinois is finally here. We still don't exactly know which presidential candidates will be tops. It looks like Hillary Clinton, at least polls show, is leading in Illinois. Donald Trump has also been leading in Illinois in some recent polls. Where are we, Matt?
Well, we got it looking like Donald Trump is the presumptive front runner, perhaps the presumptive nominee at this point for the GOP.
Do you think you would have said that like a year ago?
No.
Anyway,
I
go ahead.
don't know if I would have said that a month ago.
Nobody in TV or newspapers would have said that.
And Hillary Clinton, even though Bernie Sanders has been able to win a couple of states, the proportional voting has really hurt Sanders. So, you know, he won Michigan, but essentially split the delegates. And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton had a dominant win in Mississippi, so she came out with more delegates in the last election. So it's going to be a tough road for Sanders. The question at the Republican side is Donald Trump going to get 1,237 delegates, which he would need to win on the first ballot? And if he doesn't, then could he have major problems? Because as we've seen, the establishment, the Republicans who are going to be at this convention, a lot of them dislike Donald Trump and really seem to have said they'll take anyone but. So the question for Donald Trump is, if he gets to the convention, doesn't have enough votes, will his coalition be strong enough to survive a second, third ballot when delegates can choose to vote for whoever they wish?
Well, I think Donald, as he was talking side by side with some Trump stakes and other Trump paraphernalia, was saying he thinks he's going to make it to the Republican National Convention on time.
It's important to note that those weren't Trump stakes. That wasn't a Trump magazine.
You're paying more attention than I am.
Yeah.
Okay, Charlie, how are things looking as far as you can tell?
The problem for Republicans is that Trump, by and large, the establishment Republicans can't stand. The conservatives don't think he's a real Republican. But their choice, Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, appears to be also unpopular among a large segment of the Republican electorate. His colleagues in the Senate despise the guy on both sides of the aisle.
I've heard he doesn't have a lot of friends.
Yeah.
Senator Durbin told me that, although I didn't write it at the time because I didn't want to let the Democrats say what the Republicans are thinking. But he said he has one friend. It was Mike Lee, I think, is that Utah?
Yeah. And then for a while it was going to be Jeb Bush. He was going to surge and come forward. He's kaput. Then it was Marco Rubio, and Rubio has been, of the people who've been bandied about as possible,
like a strong contender against Hillary Clinton, for example.
He's done very poorly. He came in far behind in last Tuesday's primaries. Kasich may be starting to move forward, but he's so low in the polls that he's got a long way to go.
Yeah, but he's of course hoping to win Ohio, his home state,
and winner take all states, so he could get
to help keep Trump.
And Rubio hopes to take Florida, but the polls have Trump ahead in Florida, and Rubio's from Florida. So it's really a very fluid situation. And the thing that I think, if I were a Republican, I'd be concerned about, supposing we do get to the convention and we have to have a brokered convention and we deny Donald Trump the nomination, what will he do? What will his followers do? Because there are people who, I believe, have asked for Republican ballots, not because they're Republicans, but that they believe in the message that Donald Trump is putting forward. Are those people who will stick around and vote in November for, say, and this is a far-fetched, but a brokered convention that produces a Mitt Romney?
Yeah. Very far-fetched at this point.
Well, would they vote for Ted Cruz? Or are they just going to stay home?
Yeah, well, it is, I mean, you're right. And I don't know if it's just the spectacle, but the enthusiasm for Trump, which has surprised everybody in the political world and beyond for the last year, included his appearance in Springfield at the Capitol Convention Center, and they had 10,000 people show up, and it was they had it set up so it wasn't seats; it was standing everywhere except in the seats upstairs, and the place was full, and it was kind of an amazing program.
He's a celebrity. He draws a crowd. He knows how to work the crowd clearly, and that's paying dividends. I think one thing, if you're a Republican pundit or if you're a consultant, you're realizing you just can't make people vote for your candidate no matter how hard you try. And Donald Trump has really fed off of, I think, what the Republicans have been doing for many years. This anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-politician atmosphere has been going on so long, and people are so angry that Donald Trump seems to be a really attractive candidate, and there seems to be no stopping him. And when I spoke to lawmakers here, including Congressman Rodney Davis, who's voted for Marco Rubio yesterday, he says that a brokered convention would be a disaster for the Republican Party. And it seems to be most Republicans around here think that would be the case, because you're dividing the electorate, and if you choose someone who's not Trump, you're basically telling the people who voted in these elections, we're not choosing your candidate, we're going to choose some other guy. And that's going to maybe cause Donald Trump, who has already been on the record saying if he believes he's treated unfairly by the Republican Party, he's going to go and become a third-party candidate. He's taken all those pledges that he won't, but I still believe that if he feels slighted by the party, and certainly if he comes in with maybe 1,000 votes but 237 delegates short, if they say, oh, we're going to give it to John Kasich or Rubio, or God forbid a Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, who didn't even campaign, I think he's going to feel slighted.
Well, interesting. Well, Charlie, aren't the Democrats...
and the thing is, it occurs to me, as I said earlier, even if Trump decides, okay, I'll go along with it, I won't be a third-party candidate, what about the people who are true believers in Trump and in what he is selling, who feel that the Republican Congress, President Obama, has sold them and their interests out? They've been dealt a bill of goods. They look at the wealth of the nation over the last decades has proportionately gone to people who are already super wealthy. The average middle-class person is worse off now than they were, say, 20 years ago. And Trump has been able to channel this anger into his candidacy, which makes all these crazy promises.
Well, isn't it somewhat similar on the Democratic side? Because Bernie Sanders says,
Sanders
free college education, let's tax, Wall Street transactions, speculation he calls it, and Hillary Clinton is saying, look at all my experience, I would be the first woman president, and Sanders keeps getting support from people.
And Sanders says, your husband opened the gates through NAFTA to let our jobs be shipped overseas. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what Sanders is selling, and that's what a lot of people are buying.
I think this election's also a referendum on the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United, and just in general, people's thoughts of campaign financing. I mean, I work in a television station, so I hear all of the ads all the time, and one thing that I've noticed is I don't hear a lot of ads where it says, I'm, John Shimkus and I paid for this message, or I'm Hillary Clinton, I paid. You don't hear those because the ads, the money that's in TV, aren't coming from the candidates.
Some of them are, but a lot of other groups.
But a lot of them are not. You used to have to always hear the candidates say, I'm blah, 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 but now you don't hear that as much because you've got all these PACs supporting the candidates, and I think both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have both said, we're not taking super PAC money. Bernie Sanders, I don't have a super PAC. Donald Trump, I'm self-funding my campaign, and that's something that's locking in with Democrats, Republicans, everybody who's sick of what they see is the gross amount of money in politics.
Well, what's interesting, and congratulations to TV stations like yours.
I was going to say, about the only people who benefit are TV
There's
stations.
even these groups now spending millions of dollars in Illinois to run ads saying Donald Trump is bad.
Right.
And those those are also running on the stations, so it's kind of interesting.
But it is a horrible situation, because if you look at the ads, they're not positive ads. Here's what Charlie Wheeler believes. Here's what he would do for you in Springfield or in Washington. It's Bernie Schoenberg is a rat. Matt's a crook. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, on we go. you know, one of the, I guess the U.S. Senate race has been pretty low profile in Central Illinois this time. It seems to have been more Chicago-centric. Maybe it's because the polls show there's less of a contest than there might be. But just to note and to talk about a little bit, on the Democratic side for the open U.S. Senate, or for the U.S. Senate seat now held by Mark Kirk, the Republican, there's Mark Kirk versus a very low-funded person named James Martyr, who's from Oswego and a conservative business person. And on the Democratic side, Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman, who was shot down in a helicopter in Iraq and is in Congress. Andrea Zopp, former president of the Chicago Urban League, and Napoleon Harris, a state senator from the south suburbs of Chicago. The polls seem to show Duckworth ahead. Zopp has been quite aggressive, got some endorsements from newspapers. Where are we going with those, Matt?
Well, you mentioned Mark Kirk having like a very small adversary. I mean, Senator Kirk doesn't even, I think, seem to think that he's a threat, because the Kirk ads that I've seen have been against Tammy Duckworth.
Right, because they all assume that she's going to be
he's
the
not
candidate.
running against her yet, but
right.
he's already airing ads against her. As far as the Democratic Senate side, I do think you're right. I think a lot of people in Central Illinois, me being a Central Illinois station, have not seen a lot of the candidates, or maybe a little less dialed out of the Senate race. I think there's a lot more contention, actually, believe it or not, in the state Senate than in the U.S. Senate right now in Central Illinois.
We'll get to that in a second.
Right. So really, I think you've got a competition between, I think it's a Zopp-Duckworth race, but I think Duckworth has done a lot of legwork to get where she is in the polls, and I don't know if Zopp has enough time to come back.
Charlie, you agree with that? You think it's going to be a
I
Kirk
think,
versus Duckworth?
I think
in the
that's
fall?
what it looks
I mean,
like.
we don't want to,
but
necessarily
on the
tell
other
people
hand,
what's going to happen.
on the other hand, you can't always trust the polls.
Correct.
Because by definition, 1 out of every 20 is totally off the wall. Because the pollsters will tell you we have a 95% confidence level. That means that if we were to poll everybody, not just a selected few, the results would be within the margin of error 95 times out of 100. That works out to 19 out of 20, but it's that outlier that you always have to worry about, because you don't know when it's going to be.
And there's a bigger problem with polls these days.
Cell phones.
And we saw, because in Michigan, Hillary was up by 20 points in most of the polls. Everyone thought she was going to steamroll in Michigan. But what's the problem? People who are 20, 30 don't have landlines anymore. They're not being called necessarily, because some polls don't even call cell phones.
Yeah, I think more and more do, but they try.
But they try.
I think they're a little behind the curve.
And also, when you get called on your cell phone, how likely are you to pick up and answer or want to talk? There's just so many things now where polling has changed, and when you have someone like Senator Sanders in the race, and you're expecting a lot of young people to suddenly be in the race, your polling ability might be skewed.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we will certainly be watching that one on Tuesday. Speaking of state senate, and Matt, you brought it up a minute ago, there are a couple of races in the state that are really considered kind of referenda on the governor versus the unions, or the Democrats versus the governor, whatever. One of them is very interesting. In the 50th Senate District, there's no Democrat file right now. It includes part of Springfield. Sam McCann is a state senator from Carlinville. Republican, conservative Republican, but he has voted with unions on some things, saying that's what his constituents want, because there's a lot of state workers, including the bill that would have allowed arbitration, binding arbitration, to settle the contract between the big state workers union, AFSCME, and the governor. Governor Rauner hated that bill. He said it would take away you elected me to be at the table, that would take me away from the table. So there is a state policeman, state trooper from Springfield named Bryce Benton, who was not very well known, only just got elected last year to the Convention Center Board in Springfield, which meets once a month and is unpaid. Right. And he is now the Senate candidate running against McCann on the Republican side in the primary. And he's got more than $2.4 million of advertising, mostly trashing McCann for various things that we can talk about a little,
baggage,
some baggage, yes. There's baggage that Senator McCann is carrying about. But it's these horrible anti-McCann ads run mostly by Liberty Principles PAC, which is run by Dan Proft, who is a Chicago talk show host, who is getting money funneled to him from various interests, including the Turnaround PAC, which the governor recently gave $2 million to, and Dick Uline, who owns the Uline company. You see their trucks. It's a packaging materials company. Right. He's given Dan Proft over the years like $5 million. Uline gave Benton like a few $1,000s just the other day. Yeah. And so you've got this proxy race, and it seems to be all about the unions. And now union folks in Springfield, just as this weekend approached, we're starting to tell people, please even take a Republican ballot vote for McCann, but McCann has these problems. Matt?
Yeah, I think McCann is one saying these problems have been addressed, and I beat them in the previous election.
Yeah, that he has liens against IRS liens against his former businesses, and
questions about his military service,
and how much mileage he's claimed, which was a lot like $38,000.
And now we're seeing the Board of Elections, as of today, is looking into it. There'll be a hearing on Monday with the board, and they'll decide if it's going to go into public. Really bad timing if you're Senator McCann. And I think if you look at but I think it's the negative advertising, the money. We have, I can't tell you the amount because I'm not in the sales department, but I can tell you from being around, McCann ads air almost after every break in our newscasts. Every single one. Now McCann has started running ads countering them, so we literally have the conversation happening in one commercial break from both sides.
And he's getting union money too,
several,
hundreds of thousands in union money, but it's not comparing really to the 2.4 million so far put in by this Liberty Principles, which is a guy in Chicago who's friends with many of the governor's candidates.
I think this is clearly a race that the governor would like to see McCann lose. I mean, if he does that, that's one big vote that he loses on the unions in the Senate, and of course, Bryce Benton could be a very important vote going forward with. Particularly if, God forbid, we're still looking at being behind in a budget after November, which isn't completely out of the realm of question at this point. I think if you look at the ads, one of the things that I notice is just how divisive they've begun. I mean, you sit and you watch these McCann ads. If you watch them one by one, these anti-McCann ads, you'd almost be like, shoot, I hope I'm not living next to Sam McCann, and now you have McCann responding that Benton has been following him and his children, and you see these images of a guy with a long scope camera. And I mean, this isn't a state Senate race. These are sort of the ads I think you'd expect to see maybe in a heavy presidential race or something like that. Congressional.
Things get crazy.
But now it's happening all the way down to the state Senate. All this money and all this investment is going in, even into the state races. And again, I think is why a lot of people are getting fed up with the way the campaign finance is set.
Charlie?
And it occurs to me that from my perspective of having watched this for many, many years, it strikes me as a certain immaturity on the part of Governor Rauner and his people, in the sense that they're coming after McCann because he voted against them on a handful of issues, none of which his vote was determinative.
Yeah, because there's, 40 Democrats to 19 Republicans in the Senate. So you take it out. Right now they're just replacing one Republican with a Republican. There's still an overwhelmingly number of Democrats in the Senate.
Yeah, and the Democrats will, I can say with virtually absolute certainty, I'd bet anybody any amount of money that Democrats will have a majority after November. The reason I say that is there are 31 Democratic seats that have no Republicans running against them in November at this point. And so Cullerton's going to have the majority no matter what. And I would say if you were a little more sophisticated and were wanting to play the politics a little better, you would say to a guy like Sam McCann, yeah, on this one it's important. You vote for your constituents. Your vote doesn't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. I'll let you go on this one, but you owe me one if there ever does come a time when there's a tough vote. Instead of this notion that I am all powerful and I have to crush you because you crossed me once. The
governor hasn't come out and said that.
But it's his money, for heaven's sake.
And it's interesting, he
wouldn't
say...
wander through all these committees, these dark money, but... No, and I just say, I think it's sort of a lack of sophistication.
He did endorse Bryce Benton, and he actually did it by video at the Sangamon County Lincoln Day dinner, which offended some people, in fact, many people that I talked to, because Sangamon County is from McCann, right? And McCann was there on the dais.
Yeah.
Interesting times. The president, Obama, who recently visited Springfield, is
also
involved. Talk about getting involved. Okay, so the other race that's really appears to be Rauner versus unions or Democrats, Ken Duncan is a Democrat from Chicago, but he was not in town when there was a critical vote on this arbitration bill, and then he has voted against some overrides. He's basically voted with the governor on some things against. And he would be the 71st Democrat on some things, although a couple other Democrats aren't always voting entirely with their, their veto-proof majority is not really veto-proof because they always lose a vote or two, but Ken Duncan has been one of those. So now he's being funded by the Illinois Opportunity Project, I think.
Strange Bedfellows.
Which is another Dan Proft organized group.
The State Chamber of Commerce.
State Chamber of Commerce, we understand, has thrown through at least some group maybe $1 million into this, according to Capitol Fact's recent post. And President Obama actually voiced a TV ad for Juliana Stratton, who's a Democrat trying to take out Ken Duncan. Right. How weird is this to have the President of the United States doing a TV ad in a state House race?
Well, Ken Duncan has been an interesting person to watch this last year. And, you know, he voted against the arbitration bill, and I honestly think he might have been able to get away with that. But I think what really has stymied him was when he voted against child care, and you had Esther Golar there, and
who was on her deathbed,
and
then she died shortly thereafter.
Really, yeah. After that, I mean, if he wasn't persona non grata at that point, he was very much persona non grata at this point. And it's been interesting to watch him because if you see him around the Capitol, he doesn't look like a guy that's about to lose his seat. He doesn't seem to, you know, be like worried or concerned. There's a picture from the Illinois Observer. They took him on the phone. He was having a nice loud conversation during a vote, smiling. And like I said, I've had encounters with him, and I saw him singing in the halls. And so this doesn't seem like a guy who's like worried about what happens in this election. It seems like Ken Duncan's going to lose. I mean, there's all those questions about buying the vote also.
Well, there were some allegations in Chicago that or at least his supporters, not that he was doing it himself.
Doing a little more than taking people to the polling districts. And so I have to wonder, what happens if he loses, which I think is a fair assumption at this point. Does he get invited into a Rauner administration type position?
Well, what kind of golden parachute might be waiting in January?
Sam McCann, interestingly, notes that 3 Springfield area legislators, who all represent a lot of state employees, have been appointed by Rauner to other posts, and new people have been appointed to their jobs in the legislature, and that he's not one of those, and he voted against the governor, and look what's happening. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. So we'll see.
But one of the things that I'll point out, though, is that there's this attention on this handful of races: McCann, his contest, Duncan's contest. There's a guy running against Mike Madigan. Those have drawn all the attention. But the vast majority, and those will set records, particularly McCann and Duncan, for how much is spent. They'll wind up spending, between the candidates on the primary, more than some people spent, say, 20 years ago to run for governor.
Right.
It's just amazing. But on the other hand, as I was saying earlier, the vast majority of legislators have no contest at all, either in the primary or in the general. So all they have to do is show up next Tuesday and vote for themselves, and they're home.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes.
I think just real quick, I think there's a lot of budget implications to these races, because if Rauner succeeds in getting some of these lawmakers, out of their seats, then does that set us in for a long fought battle? Or if Rauner seems to, if McCann wins, despite the onslaught of money and politics that went into it, does that make Bruce Rauner's position weaker, after this? And is there more room to negotiate? I'm curious to see, no matter what happens, how these elections and the results affect the budget negotiations.
Yeah, the governor doesn't seem like he likes to give very much. Of course, you could say the same thing, I guess, about Madigan, although he's been there for all these years and always reached a budget with different governors, although I'm sure Rauner's people would say, yeah, but look at how out of balance we are. Of course, we had more taxes, and then they fell off, and then the governor didn't agree to anything to fill the gap, and now our comptroller, Leslie Munger, is talking about, we'd have to raise the income tax to 7 or 8% to fill the gap, and that's never going to happen.
Well, and it's not a gap that you have to fill all in one year.
Correct.
Because even with the tax increase that the Democrats put in, raising the rate up to 5% on individuals, that lowered the gap, cut it not quite in half, but it did it over a number of years. And then when the taxes rolled back to a lower level, that's when the gap started to build up again.
Yeah. The governor last week called a pretty quick press conference one day when the Senate was in, and accused Mike Madigan. It's like a week before the primary. Mike Madigan's on vacation. This was one day after, by the way, the governor was in Southern Illinois campaigning with John Shimkus, who broke his own term limits pledge and has been in the House for 20 years.
But he's just so valuable to the district. He couldn't deprive him of his services.
But he said, Madigan should be here negotiating. It's terrible that the House isn't here. I hate the fact that colleges and other social service agencies aren't getting their money, and it's because Madigan's not here. Your thoughts? Charlie, in particular, you've been around for a while.
Well, first First, I would say that it's not at all unusual for the legislature not to be in session before the primary. It's not at all unusual for the legislature not to be in session during Easter week or during Passover week. In fact, that's kind of the standard practice. But everything is just so different in the current session because of the governor and because of the hostility between the executive branch and the legislative branch, which is worse than it's ever been. Should the House be here? Yeah, I suppose they could be here collecting their per diem, but until there's actually a sit-down, so it's not that the House needs to be here, it's that Madigan and Cullerton and Durkin and Radonio have to sit down with Rauner, and they have to honestly negotiate, and they have to say, okay, here's where we're willing to deal, this is off the table. And approach it from that level and try and work out some compromise. They've been able to do it on other issues. They've done it on criminal justice reform, which is one of the bright spots of this whole administration. They were able to negotiate between business and labor changes in the unemployment insurance program. And I'm saying, why can't we do this on some of the other stuff? Well, and like you pointed out, Madigan's worked well with Republican governors, with Thompson, with Edgar, with Ryan. He worked better with the Republicans than he did with Blagojevich or Quinn, who were Democrats, for heaven's sake.
Matt, I want to get into just one other quick thing.
Sure.
I'm an old U of I soccer player, although it's still only a club, sorry to say. But Lovie Smith is coming to U of I in Champaign as a football coach. Right. Just your thoughts, being a Champaign
everybody's
station.
Excited for Lovie Smith.
What do we think? I mean, he's getting paid a lot, but
he's getting paid a lot,
and
I think that's the thing he's getting paid a lot, but he raised 370, essentially he did, because when he was hired, they sold more than $370,000 in tickets for next year in one day.
Is that right? So you think it's a good move for the university?
He's taken $1 million or $2 million for the first 2 years. I mean, if he can bring in those kind of people and they can stay, the question is if the football team remains competitive, then those people will stay with the team and follow it. If they start to just continue to lose, that's going to be a big problem.
We'll see how it is. And he is the former Bears coach. Yeah. Matt Porter,
and I was going to say,
and we're about out of time. Charlie Wheeler.
I'll say real quickly, he will also be able to recruit top flight talent better than his predecessor.
Sounds good. Yeah. Matt Porter, Charlie Wheeler, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenberg, thank you, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View. Happy voting.